How's it going, guys? It is Blake back once again from theadventures.com or the fandom pages. Today, I'm going to be starting yet another reading. The previous upload I just got done uploading was for the introduction for the Kybalion. You can go back and check that out if you are interested in diving into some, I suppose, occult material. Yeah, we'll be continuing that book this week as well. But today I'm going to be doing, or starting rather, the new book by, well, it's not really that new, but one of the more recent books by Teal Swan and the follow-up to Shadows Before Dawn, which is the completion process here, which is really much more of a self-help book, I would say, compared to Shadows Before Dawn. I feel like Shadows Before Dawn was sort of more, I don't want to say educational because self-help is educational, but I feel like it was more I don't know, I guess it was just more foundational advice, whereas this is actually building blocks, steps that you should take and stuff like that. And normally I don't think I like the idea of doing self-help video reading uploads, but since this is the continuation to Shadow Before Dawn, I just feel way more obligated to read this one and start this one. And also, I kind of want to do all of her books, to be very honest. I know she has another one that she recently released, I think last year, but at the moment, I think this is probably the last book by her I'm going to do. So we're going to be jumping into this one today. These chapters are very long in this book compared to Shadows Before Dawn. So I'm just going to do the introduction today, so sort of similar to what I did for the Kybalion. We'll start with the introduction, and then the next upload will be chapter 1, because the introduction is pretty lengthy as well. Okay, so I guess we could just jump right into it. So yeah, if you guys haven't read, or if you didn't watch if you haven't read and or if you haven't watched the readings for the Shadows Before Dawn book, I know that one took several years for me to finish. I shouldn't say that. I got the book years ago, but it did take quite a while for me to actually finish the book. It did take several years for me to actually finish that series. But you can go back. All the videos are on the channel. Every single part of the book is on the channel if you just want to read it or if you just want to listen to it. So yeah, that's all up on here, but we're going to start with this today. Introduction. Let's jump into it. So, the year was 2001. I was sitting in a hole, my wrists and ankles tied together. I can't say that I was afraid because the years of abuse leading up to that point had desensitized me to danger. It was more that I had given up on life. I didn't see the point. I had concealed to the reality that my life was a torture chamber made for one, and I was never going to get out alive. When I was in grade school, I had been targeted by a family acquaintance who, unbeknownst to my parents, was a psychopath. Outwardly, he presented himself as a respected community leader and health professional, but he had a much darker side. Only a few people knew he participated in cult rituals. He became my childhood mentor and gained unfettered access to me. My parents trusted him and were unaware that my relationship with him was built on torture. They saw most of the red flags but misinterpreted them. My abuser threatened to kill my family if I ever told anyone what he did, and I knew he was fully capable of murder. The ritual abuse lasted for 13 years. I spent a lot of time sitting in that hole in the ground, nicknamed the mind space. It was just large enough for a person to sit in. Covering the hole was a nailed-together lattice of weathered wood. In the summers, the bottom of the hole was lined with stinging nettle. This was his idea of a way to train my mind. Before I was put into the space, I was usually stripped naked and my wrists and ankles were tied together. I had no idea how long he was going to leave me there. I had no idea whether he would decide to keep me indefinitely, kill me, or return me to my parents later that night. Despite the pain of uncertainty, I had been confined to this hellhole so many times it felt routine. I was acclimated to suffering, except for one thing. Going into the mind space meant I had to be alone with myself, and I couldn't bear it. I felt only the emptiness within me. Even worse than emptiness, it was a complete void, its edges colored by grief. For years I did everything I could to avoid that grief and to distance myself from that void. And then something happened. Sitting in the mind space one day, I felt the by then familiar desperation. But this time was different. I realized that if there was movement in my feeling of desperation, the movement meant I was traveling toward a new emotion. The more I thought about desperation, the clearer it became that movement toward something had to be towards something wanted and away from something unwanted. So I began to ask myself the question, what is it internally that I don't want? More than that, what is it that I am internally moving away from? Lo and behold, I discovered that my sense of desperation was actually keeping me from feeling despair, from a complete absence of hope. Losing hope is the most intense feeling of powerlessness in the range of human emotions. Some part of me was convinced that slipping into despair meant death, so that part of me had been resisting despair in order to survive. I could say that I decided to be brave that day, but really I had just given up hope. I was standing on the edge of a precipice. I was emotionally exhausted from almost 13 years of torture. Despair was like a tornado that chased me no matter where I ran, and I was tired of running. I wanted death. And so I did the opposite of what I had always done. I turned around and ran straight into the tornado. I committed emotional suicide. I didn't know what would happen, but I did it anyway. I was in for a surprise. For a moment, I drowned in the misery of heavy anguish. It felt like I was being crushed, bruised, and broken. I took a breath. Instead of pulling away from it, I went deeper. I gave the feeling permission to consume me. I allowed it as if it had a valid reason to be there, and soon, like sun rays penetrating the depths of the ocean, I experienced a lightness of being. I felt relief. The fear of the feeling itself was evaporated by my choice to dive into the feeling instead. I spent some time basking in that relief. It was the first time in my life that I had not abandoned myself. At that point, I had no idea why what I had done worked. I just knew that it did. And so I tried it again and again. I tried it almost every time I was confronted with an uncomfortable feeling that I was tempted to run away from. Eventually, I managed to escape from the man who had stolen my childhood, and for years after that, I tried to heal. In the years that followed, I tried to understand exactly why the technique I stumbled upon had worked. Once I understood how I had actually healed myself, I realized this was a breakthrough that could really change the world. The timing could not have been better. So many souls in this world need healing, and I had discovered that it all starts with really feeling our emotions. In the womb, we humans felt sensations from the world before we even saw it. When we first come into this life as tiny babies, we experience the world entirely through perception. As we proceed through life, we carry the emotional tone of our childhood into our adulthood. It's a learned vibrational state that we build upon and add to. In essence, we learn to relate to people through this emotional tone. This is positive if the emotional tone of our childhood is positive. But if the emotional tone of our childhood is negative and painful, this negative and painful emotional state will be the filter through which we perceive the world as adults. It will be the emotional baseline trauma that we never seem to get over. We will spend our lives trying to fix ourselves with little to no success. In my case, I attended trauma therapy for 5 years with a few therapists who specialize in ritual trauma. I was exposed to the typical modalities and the most up-to-date therapies within that field, and I figured out what worked and what didn't. While working with traditional trauma, I was introduced to the concept of inner child work, and it was a revelation for me. The theory behind inner child work as a healing modality is that all people on earth hold within themselves the essence of the children we once were. As we matured, one part of us grew up, but the other part stayed a child. This inner child symbolizes our emotional selves. Regardless of your childhood experiences, good or bad, the adult part of you grew up, despite not getting everything it needed as a child. Therefore, your adult self holds the key to healing. But when I was in trauma therapy myself, the way I was doing inner child work never made me feel complete. It wasn't until I already had a successful international career as a spiritual luminary that I came to completely understand why the technique that I had discovered in the mind space worked, and why inner child work worked. And even more importantly, and this is the crux, how they fit together. I realized that I had found the Holy Grail. I began to design a process, one that would help make even the most wounded and fractured person whole again. I perfected the process by using it on myself first and then with my clients. My wish for you is that you experience the kind of joyous life that is available only to those who are willing to courageously journey deep within themselves, resurrecting the aspects of themselves that have been lost. After all, if this process can heal a survivor of complex ritual abuse, it can heal anyone. I call this approach the completion process. All right, and that does it for the introduction. I feel like with pretty much most of her books, she sort of prefaces, or she starts the beginning with a little background on the ritual abuse and whatnot, because that's really what sort of, I guess in a way, actually kicked off her journey, even though, you know, she was apparently born with, just born more in tune, I suppose, with the metaphysical side of things. It seems like a lot of the ritual abuse and whatnot is actually what sort of took her down the path of self-help and coming up with this process, sort of integrating some of the stuff that she learned when she was going through treatment, and added some of her own technique to it as well, so sort of put her own spin on it. So that's essentially what this is going to be about, is sort of that process and all the peats and parts that make up it. So we'll be continuing that with part 1, which is attunement, in the next upload. So yeah, stay tuned for that one. That's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next upload. Take care.